Now, I know what you're thinking. Ain't we just talking about words here? But let me tell you, when it comes to building deep, rich worlds, language is the goddamn key to everything. Whether you're crafting full languages like Tolkien, filling your world with shiny idioms like Firefly, or borrowing ancient tongues like John Gwynne, language shapes your lore in ways that go beyond simple words. So stick around. This is gonna be all kinds of shiny. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time World series on building deep fantasy lore with your host, Marie Mullaney. In the episode where I covered the creation of cultural symbols, I briefly spoke about words and how they are symbols, and you can check that episode out in the information card. But honestly, language is such a critical and underrated symbol when it comes to building deep lore that it deserves an episode all of its own. Think about what it means to see words as symbols. Yes, you have around 20,000 symbols mapped out in your head, and you give them specific meaning. That's freaking amazing. And that's just for one language. Now, while that is awesome, it's also one heck of an opportunity for the world builder. Creating symbols for your non-human sapient species, your magic system, and your fantastical elements. All this is tied to language and deep lore creation. Expressing your cultures through idioms and colloquialisms and swear words unique to those cultures is an amazing way to create and explore depth in your lore. But it can be hard to do this and confusing to know where to start. To my mind, there are three approaches to creating this kind of lore. So without further ado, let's dive into the first of these approaches, creating a language. When we're talking about language as a tool for deep world building, it is impossible not to mention the Grandmaster himself, J.R.R. Tolkien. He didn't just create Middle-earth and fill it with beautiful stories. No, the stories were built from the languages. Tolkien's background as a philologist, someone who studies languages, and its historical development, deeply influenced how he built his world. Middle-earth isn't just home to one language, but several fully realized tongues. Quenya and Sindarin for the elves, Kuzdal for the dwarves, and Black Speech for the servants of Sauron, and more. Each language reflects not just a different culture, but an entire way of life, history, and even the eventual fates of its speakers. For example, Quenya is an ancient, almost ceremonial language used by the High Elves. It's poetic and musical, reflecting their long lives and high status. On the other hand, Sindarin, which is more commonly spoken, evolved as the elves spread across Middle-earth. This linguistic evolution hints at a rich history of migration and conflict, without Tolkien ever needing to say it outright. So, you can definitely use constructed languages to add depth to world building, and let's explore a couple of the advantages that languages give you. 1. Deeper lore. Each language is like a window into the culture that speaks it. The Elvish languages feel ancient and ethereal like the elves themselves. Meanwhile, the Black Speech of Mordor is harsh and guttural. 2. Realism and immersion. By creating fully functioning languages with consistent grammar, vocabulary, and rules, Tolkien made his world feel very real. You didn't just visit Middle-earth. You felt like it existed long before you started reading, and that it would continue to exist long after. Every time a character uses a word from one of these languages, it reminds you that there is an entire world beyond the immediate plot. And 3, great names. Consider Mordor. It's derived from the Sindarin word and literally translates into Black Land. Black Land is hella direct and prosaic, but Mordor? Damn, that's a spooky name. The name itself carries the weight of Middle-earth's geography and history, evoking the image of a barren, ash-filled wasteland that reflects Sauron's malevolent influence. Now, I don't generally recommend going the whole hog and creating an entire language from scratch, unless that sounds like fun to you, in which case go forth. But even creating just a few key phrases, terms, or expressions can add a massive amount of depth to your world. The trick is consistency, and that means creating the framework of a language, its basic grammar, and how its words sound. So, here are my guidelines for creating the framework of your own conlang. 1. Start with a basic sound or phonetics. Choose a set of sounds or letters for your language. Do they use hard, guttural sounds like black speech or soft, flowing sounds like Gwynne? Consistent sounds gives your language unique flavor. Pro tip, pick a few real-world languages for inspiration. Tolkien drew from Finnish and Welsh for his Elvish languages. You can pull from languages that fit the tone of your world. Listen to YouTube videos of people speaking in their native tongues to find a language that sounds right. 2. Develop grammar rules, but keep it simple. Set a few basic grammatical rules, how sentences are structured, how verbs change, etc. It doesn't have to be complex. Maybe your language puts the verb at the beginning or always has the subject at the end, or maybe sentence structure isn't important in your language and prefixes and suffixes controls how the action flows. Don't go crazy here. Define the basic structure only. Pro tip, keep a consistent rule for plurals and tenses. For example, adding an I to plurals like elf becomes elfie. Pro tip 2. Tenses can be bananas. My advice, less is more. If you can get away with only 3 tenses, do it. Guideline 3. Create a few key words and roots. Focus on important words that reflect your world's culture or magic system. Words for king, warrior, magic, home, any of those might be good starting points. You can also invent prefixes or suffixes that modify the meanings. For example, in Gwynne, tar is a prefix for royalty, like Tar Minyatar, the first king. Pro tip, check out those learner language books, any of them, French for Dummies, whatever, and create words that match the first few lessons as though somebody was learning this language, and that gives you that basic startup vocabulary. Guideline 4, build phrases and idioms. Once you have a few words and grammar rules, create simple phrases or idioms that characters can use in dialogue. This is where the cultural flavor of the language really shines. For example, you can create greetings or curses or blessings that reflect your world's unique culture. For instance, a desert culture might say, "May the sand never choke your path," and then you translate that. And 5, consistency is key. I know I've said this before, but it does bear repeating. Even if you only have a handful of words and phrases, make sure they're used consistently. That way, your readers or players will start to recognize them, and the language will feel more real. Remember, your conlang doesn't have to be perfect or complete to add depth to your world. Even a few carefully crafted words, used consistently, can go a long way in immersing your audience. But look, It's a lot of effort to create a language, and maybe that sounds a bit too much like hard work, and I do not blame you. So let's take a look at a different strategy, using existing languages for the sake of simplicity. While Tolkien went all out with full-blown languages, John Gwynne takes a different, more grounded approach in his Bloodsworn series. Instead of creating entirely new languages, Gwynne leans on something much simpler but no less effective. He uses real-world languages, specifically Old Norse, to breathe life into his Viking-inspired world in the Bloodsworn trilogy. Gwynne borrows terms from Old Norse, and that gives the world a sense of historical and cultural authenticity. And by doing this, he actually taps into existing mythology and the feel of the Viking era, allowing the reader to populate the world. I will talk more about this in the last video in this series, but this is a great example of using reader expectations to create fake depth in your world building. As an example of this, John Gwynne uses the word Veitsen, which means monster in Old Norse, to call monsters in his world. And instantly this creates a fantasy world that feels like the Viking myths of Earth. But Gwynne doesn't have to explain the entire cultural context. The word itself carries all the weight. The word is doing the heavy lifting in this world building, evoking the connotations with a Viking era atmosphere. So, what does this strategy, this approach of using existing and sometimes dead languages give you as the world builder? Authenticity. By using Old Norse, Gwynne roots his world in recognizable ancient traditions. There's an immediate sense of historical depth, like the world has grown out of something real, even if the setting itself is fictional. And this is particularly powerful in fantasy settings that draw inspiration from real-world cultures. It would be really weird if you had these Viking words, but you didn't have a Viking culture. So, match culture with language if you're going to do that. 2, it gives you an ease of access. Unlike Tolkien's complex languages, Gwynne's approach doesn't require the reader to learn new words or grammar. The terms are, they feel familiar at least, because they're drawn from real languages, and you can learn them quite easily. It makes the language easy to engage with while still creating all the extra deep lore levels. It also has great symbolic power. Using real-world terms, especially those tied to myth and history, carries inherent symbolism from the symbolism of our world basically infuses the symbolism of your world. It's a shorthand for the themes and values that you're drawing on from our world to populate in your world. How can you use this approach? 1, choose a language. Choose a language that fits your setting. If your world draws on a particular real-world culture, absolutely use from that real-world culture. If it's inspired by a real-world culture, you can also draw on that language. But try and make sure that the vibes of the language matches the vibes of the culture. Use language to enhance your themes. Pick words that embody the central ideas of your story and world. Don't just replace random words. If your story revolves around themes of survival and honor in harsh landscape, then pick words that, reflect that. Words for snow or words for monster, etc. If you have heavy magic, then pick words for magic from the language of your choice. Start simple, stay consistent. You don't need to overload your story with dozens of foreign terms, okay? And you don't want that. You want the reader to find your story still accessible. All you're looking for here is some texture. So pick a few words to replace with words from our world that fit your culture. I did this with my magic terms in Sangwheel. naming the fuel of my magic system as Elamar, the Finnish word for life, and so on. So this approach is a really good option for adding depth to your world without creating the full language, without all of that effort. Which of these two approaches works best in your opinion? Let me know in the comments whether you'd like to borrow from our world or whether you want to create full languages. But whether you're creating a language or whether you're using an existing language, in either case, you should create some expressions, idioms, and colloquialisms unique to your culture. This is an awesome way to create contrast between cultures and to create depth in world building. So let's circle back to Firefly and talk about the shiny language built for that world. Joss Whedon's Firefly might not have gone down the route of inventing a whole new language like Tolkien's, or even borrowing from ancient languages like John Gwynne, but it still managed to create a vibrant, lived-in world. By crafting a distinctive blend of slang, idioms, and even bits of Mandarin, Whedon made the universe of Firefly feel both futuristic and familiar, and yet uniquely its own. Let's take a look at how Whedon achieved this. 1. Cultural fusion. In the Firefly universe, you've got this fascinating mix of American frontier culture and Chinese influence, which is reflected in the characters' dialogue. People might curse in Mandarin or sprinkle a few Mandarin phrases into their English conversation, which tells the audience a lot about the blending of cultures in this future society. The characters don't stop to explain it, it just happens naturally, making the world feel very lived in and multicultural. Memorable idioms and colloquialisms. The show's idioms are another layer of world-building gold. Expressions like shiny, which means good or great, don't just serve as slang. They evoke the optimistic, scrappy attitude of the crew and reflect the make-do mentality of the frontier world they live in. Similarly, goram is a slang substitute for a curse word, adding a layer of personality to the dialogue without being overly explicit. And it's also worth talking in this context about names that carry symbolism. This is a key part of Firefly's language, the names that have meaning, like browncoats isn't just a catchy term for the rebel faction, it symbolizes their gritty underdog fight against the Alliance, and the name reflects their identity, their cause, their uniforms, and their struggle. What can we take away from Firefly's approach? 1. Use slang and idioms to reflect culture. One of the quickest ways to make a culture feel distinct is through its expressions. Think about how your world's people would describe everyday things. Is there a phrase that represents their cultural values, like shiny does for the Firefly crew? If your world has different cultures or regions, give each culture its own flavor of slang and idioms to make them feel different. Pro tip, swear words are great for this. If you can tie your swear words to something in your world, it really does ground the reader in what the culture thinks of as important or profane. Holy or profane. In Lumiaron, the main culture for my epic fantasy series, Sangwheel Chronicles, I have a wheel as the symbol of resurrection. And there's this religious sect that teaches that a soul that commits a grave sin will be destroyed by the wheel rolling over them, treading on their soul when they die. And for this reason, I replaced the word damned or damn with the word trodden or treaded in my culture. So instead of saying damn it, somebody in Lumiaron will say tread it, going back to this concept of getting destroyed by the wheel. So next time your characters need to swear, consider what they think of as profane and what they think of as holy, and try to come up with some unique expressions for their culture. 2. Blend real-world languages or dialects. If your world has multiple cultures, and it really, really should, then you should borrow from multiple real-world languages like Firefly does with blending English and Mandarin. These languages reflect the blending of cultures in that world, making it feel more textured and diverse. This can be a subtle but effective way of showing how cultures have interacted with each other in history. I did this too in Lumiaron, where I have each culture on the Bloedben, the main peninsula, has their own language drawn from our world. So I used various European languages, and then I created a mixture of terms drawing from these languages to show the cultural interaction of these guys coming together on this peninsula. 3. Create names with meaning. Just like how brown coats hold symbolic weight, or even Mordor being black land, think about how you can use names to embody the essence of a group, place, or movement in your world. The name itself should tell part of the story, whether it's like Stormlords or Iron Fleet, names that carry history or values of the world without needing long explanation. The best part of this approach is that you don't need to come up with entirely new languages or even research old languages. Sometimes it's as simple as creating a few idioms or slang terms that your characters use in everyday speech. Whether you're creating full languages like Tolkien, or using idioms and names to ground your world like Firefly, or borrowing from real languages like John Gwynne, the way you use language in your world can create layers of meaning that go far beyond simple communication. As a strategy for creating deep lore, this is one that I highly recommend. So go forth and populate the symbolism of your world with words. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give it a like and maybe check out my epic fantasy books if you're interested in the deep lore I built for my world. If you would like early access to all my videos, including the rest of the series, you can join the channel right here on YouTube, and for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can enjoy all kinds of cool perks like member-only live streams and shout-out like this one to Aya, Tiffany, Dylan, and Patricio, just-in-timers of the Build It in Wood level, and Katie and Tony, just-in-timers of the Build It in Stone level. The support of my members really helps the channel grow, and I appreciate every single one of you. However, don't feel obligated to support the channel financially. You can also show your support just by watching another video. Since you enjoyed this video, maybe check out my video on how to measure time in fantasy stories. And I will see you soon for another episode from Just in Time Worlds, where we build what we need when we need it.